All right. My name is Schmidt. We're here with Erin Percheron. It's June 13th, 2024. We're at Andante Vineyard in Montreal. Erin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
First question, as you probably know, is why wine?
Why wine? Well, I would say that it didn't start with wine. I went to the University of Oregon and studied environmental studies, and when I graduated, I took an internship to Costa Rica. And when I got back, I needed a job, and in Eugene, there weren't many environmental jobs at the time. So I got a job in a tasting room. And that very year, they asked me if I wanted to participate in Harvest, and I did. So that's my first step into the wine industry, and from that point on, I thought, well, why would I want to do anything else?
So back up for a second, talk about life before wine a little bit. You mentioned U of O. Tell us about where you were born and raised.
Yeah.
And path into college.
So born and raised in the Bay Area, went to Berkeley High. So around the wine industry, I guess, but not really connected to it at the time. No family in the wine field either. And I went to University of Oregon, and at the time just wanted to get away from the Bay Area, which is why I chose U of O. And yeah.
What were you thinking you would do?
Well, I changed my major maybe about 3 or 4 times. But originally I wanted to be a veterinarian. Love animals, still do. I grew up horseback riding, and I worked in a vet during high school as well. So went down that track and quickly realized, well, I had to take math and chemistry at the same time, and I didn't really enjoy that prospect, so I changed it to English, and then quickly realized I did want to do something in the environmental kind of science field, so I changed it again back to environmental studies, and then I minored in geology as well, because I always found the historical kind of geology of how Oregon was formed and tectonic plates really interesting.
So you mentioned kind of coming back and finding a tasting room kind of by accident. Tell me about that first experience. Where were you, and what were your first impressions?
I was in Eugene, and I was working for Iris Vineyards. First impressions was, well, this is really cool. I get to just pretty much work around wine all day long, and at the time I had just finished, moved out of a house that had a really large backyard and had a ton of fruit trees, and I ended up making my own wine from those plum trees, and it was the most god-awful thing I probably have ever had, but it kind of inspired, this could be something that's interesting. So when I got the opportunity to work in the tasting room, I thought, well, we'll learn a little bit more about this. This is a kind of cool industry to be in. And then, with the harvest work, it seemed like the perfect balance of, manual labor, not sitting at a desk all day, and actually like crafting something, which is what I really enjoy about it is, taking a raw product, grapes, and making it into something, transforming it into something different that you can enjoy with friends, family, and nothing like the original product in that way.
So I know first harvest for people are kind of they're pretty memorable most times. So tell me memories from your first harvest. What were the moments that made you want to keep doing it?
I would say the cellar master at the time, Bruce Howard, he was a really strong force in terms of like uplifting everyone's spirits, because harvest can be really challenging, and we were running 12 and 12 shifts, and I was on the night shift, and it was just kind of the most memorable parts of harvest were working with the people and having a really fun and enjoyable time while doing really hard work.
So coming out of that first harvest, then what were you thinking? Were you thinking of something you wanted to pursue, and if so, what was the next step?
So after harvest, I was still working at Iris. I stayed on, in the tasting room, and then I also took up some administrative tasks, and then also cellar work, kind of Jill of all trades at the time, because there wasn't like a permanent full-time cellar position. And so then I ended up doing harvest again and working there for the full year in 16. And there wasn't like a moment of, well, what do I do next? It was just like, well, let's just keep going and see where it goes. In 16, after that harvest, this is actually when I met my partner. And he was in the CAEP program, interning from France. And after that harvest, we decided to go to New Zealand and do a harvest there. And it was kind of nice because you can pretty much go from harvest to harvest to harvest if you go around the world doing that. So their harvest started in, what was that? March, I want to say. And we were there until, well, maybe more like April, but we were there until July. So we stayed on a little after, but working for a really large winery at the time, and it definitely taught me what I didn't want to work in, because it was, you know, more of like the mass production scale of winemaking, and so that was, I feel, a really important learning point for me. And yeah, so then, you know, 16. Finished out 16, then went to 17 in New Zealand, and then came back in the summer and did another harvest in California. And I ended up doing 2 harvests in California, 17 and 18, before coming to Oregon again in 19. But in 17, I was in Sonoma, working for a small, really small boutique winery, Talisman. He pretty much only focuses on Pinot. So that was really interesting to see, you know, his take on Pinot, and just get his insights as well. You go mass production to like very small, and it's just a whole new world at that point. Yeah, and then in 18, and this is between this time, we're traveling around. We went back to France, and then we came back, and we got married in 18. And then that summer of 18, worked for a natural wine producer in an urban winery in Berkeley, California, Brock Cellars. And that was a really fun opportunity because I got to work with a whole bunch of grape varieties that I've never heard of personally. And it wasn't all about Pinot or Chardonnay, and or Sauv Blanc, like New Zealand. And yeah, that kind of inspired some desire to learn more about unique varietals and not just what you find mostly in the Willamette. And then yeah, in 19 we moved back to Oregon because we felt that there were more opportunities in Oregon in the wine industry. And at the time in 19, I was working for Kelly Kidney. I got to work for a couple of her different people that she makes wine for. So that was really nice to get, you know, different terroir, different clones, and 2 different facilities working at. And then, you know, 2020 is still under Kelly, but Andante wanted to hire, you know, a full-time person. So at that point, I made my way under the Andante umbrella, as you would say. And yeah, and then just been here since and moved up to the winemaking position in 2021.
So you mentioned the kind of the ability to harvest hop and to get a lot of experience quickly. So tell me about going from Oregon to New Zealand to California, not just sort of size of winery, but also what was it like, I guess, culturally? What was different about the different winemaking regions?
Oregon at the time, you know, in 15, 16, and in the location where we were, was a little bit more relaxed feeling. And comparing that to, well, the New Zealand experience culturally, everyone's super nice over there, and but it was just really impressive how much Sauv Blanc is like churning through that facility. And it's kind of almost like a whirlwind where you didn't even think about necessarily where you were as much as like doing the job during harvest. We did have some time after to travel around a bit and see the sights, see Hobbiton, of course. But yeah, and then comparing that to California, specifically the difference between like the Sonoma region and Berkeley. Well, the Sonoma region is just very touristy, and you know, Scott with Talisman was very down to earth. It just seemed almost counterintuitive of what you would think of that area, at least as an outsider. And with Brock, it was, you know, a really cool experience to be at an urban winery where he's doing native ferments, but it's, you know, in an urban setting, and so you're always just curious, well, how does that work? And it does, and it does well.
You mentioned kind of learning lessons along the way about things you did and didn't want. So as you were in these various places, were you starting to kind of figure out what you were looking for, and as if you wanted to settle down in a place, were you figuring out what varietals you wanted to work for, what kind of size you wanted to work for?
Yes and no. I'd say it's been kind of, you know, still learning what we want and don't want and things, but you know, knowing that the Oregon industry seemed to be more accessible, and I would say almost like less touristic version of Napa Sonoma. Obviously there's still tourism here, but it just feels different. So wanting to be in an area that felt a little bit more like down to earth. And then in varietals, you know, I really love seeing all of these little producers popping up that have made, you know, Trousseau or Cab Franc or Chenin or Gamay, and I think personally that is a great asset to the Oregon wine industry, because it's not just all about Pinot and Chardonnay. And I love Pinot and Chardonnay, and it has its place, but I get really excited about the other varietals that do really well here.
So tell me about meeting your partner and about sort of the deciding to go from that to going to New Zealand together.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a whirlwind romance in the sense that like we met in 2016, and we're like, well, we don't really want to, you know, stop this. So like, what can we do? Because he couldn't stay. Where could we go together to see if this is something real? And so that's, you know, I couldn't go to France to work because I don't have a working holiday visa. And it was, you know, New Zealand, Australia, and I think maybe South Africa has a working holiday visa. And to me, I thought, well, not Australia. There's a lot of venomous things there. But like, you know, New Zealand could be cool. And it's a beautiful place, and has 2 different islands on it. They're very different, and so that's where we settled on. And so yeah, and then that just, you know, turned into us wanting to keep it going and finding the next place to be and continue doing what we're doing.
What did you learn about the different AVAs? Did you start to develop an interest in one over the other, or an interest in working with one more?
I don't necessarily have an interest of working with one more than another, because they're all different, and I like how they're different. From a personal standpoint, you know, with our own project, we've solely worked with Columbia Gorge so far, and that's been really interesting to me, because it's not, maybe it is becoming more popular, but it's not as popular as, you know, the Willamette Valley, and they have all these different varietals that they can grow in the Columbia Gorge AVA, and you know, the geology of that area is always really intriguing to me. But within the Willamette Valley, I don't necessarily, I mean, Andante doesn't buy fruit. We don't source from anyone, so it's all just vineyard designate. And yeah, I mean, they're all just different, and it's fun to see them, but I don't have a favorite.
Well, let's talk about this place then a little bit. And obviously, it bounced around a lot, saw a lot of different places. Tell me about getting to know a place like Andante and getting to know the vineyards here on a more full year scale. What were your first impressions of Andante, and what have you been excited to learn here?
Yeah, well, the first impression I had, I came down, Kelly had asked me to come meet Karen and Joe. When their building was just partially built, they had their structure and their half of their winery kind of poured, and they were doing their tastings just in a small corner of the production area, and just sat down, and they were very welcoming, very friendly, really wanting to get to know me as a person as well, and so it just felt like a really good connection. And then they have a lot of varietals here that you don't see in many other places. We do have Pinot and Chardonnay. The majority of the vineyard is planted in Pinot. But then the second largest piece is Sauv Blanc. And that's done extraordinarily well here. And a lot of people consider it, and I consider it to be our flagship kind of wine. And then, I think the second runner-up would maybe be our Aligote. And again, that's just a varietal that is becoming more popular, but many people don't grow it. So yeah, and then, we have things like Marsanne, which I thought would just not do well here at all when I learned that we had Marsanne. And it's 3 rows. We just increased it this year to add another 4. So, but it crops really heavy, and, we've ripened it in the last 3 years in a row, and that's been just really impressive, and maybe speak to some climate change, but it's a really diverse site. And we also, we have Gamay, and that's been fun. We've done our first Gamay last year. That was a red Gamay. And we just planted Chenin Blanc and Cab Franc over up by their house, and so we're just kind of really diving into all the other unique varietals that can grow in this area. And I do think this site does whites really well. Our Pinots are great too, but I'm really always very excited about the whites that come out of it.
Yeah, so tell me about the site. Tell me about getting to know the site and about kind of figuring out from vineyard to bottle how things are going to look.
Well, I would say a lot of that was just hand-me-down from working under Kelly at this site and kind of getting her thought process on how to treat them. And then it's been really interesting trying to figure that out on your own now that, I'm the head winemaker and saying, well, this is how it was done. Can we do it slightly different? And how does that kind of change it? And that's been the really fun, intriguing part of working here, getting that kind of permission to explore how it can be done maybe a little differently, or tweak things, or keep them the same if we just absolutely loved it.
My next question was going to be about making decisions and being at the sort of the top of the food chain there. So tell me about that. Tell me about the first harvest in charge as a winemaker. What was it like, and what were maybe the moments you weren't expecting? Yeah,
well, the first harvest I was in charge was actually the year my son was born too. So I had a 5-month-old, and it was, very thankful. My mom, came up from California and helped, and we have daycare and all that, but still mentally, understanding that you're in charge of all of this wine and vineyard decisions in terms of how it comes to bottle, and then you also have this little tiny child that you're in charge of and you have to think about, and so it's kind of a hard balance to just mentally do at first, and yeah, it's kind of surreal. And even now, I would say dealing with imposter syndrome of just I'm here, and feel very grateful. And so yeah, it's always kind of funny to look back at that trajectory and see how it went and where I am.
What was the first big decision you had to make?
Well, let's see. I would say that calling pick times was the very first one. You know, we made sparkling that year too, so the very first fruit to come in was our sparkling fruit, and making sure that the bricks and the pH were where we wanted them, and you know, just trying to be on top of every single one, knowing where my numbers were, and you know, what to do if they weren't quite right, kind of thing, and or you know, things couldn't get picked when I wanted them. But so yeah, I mean, I came on pretty much in April after my son was born as the head winemaker. So my first big decisions were related to harvest. So.
And how did the first harvest turn out? Or how did the first vintage turn out?
I think that it turned out really well. Everyone seems to react well to it and enjoy it. So that's always a nice feeling, especially when it's your first one. You're like, well, nothing went wrong. So that's good. And, you know, what can we do even better next time, kind of thing? And how do we enhance it from here? And just always kind of learning that, thinking about that.
When you took over as head winemaker 2021, tell me what your sort of approach was, stylistic approach was to winemaking, and has it changed in the past few years?
Yeah, I would say that 2021 was really looking back to Kelly as the mentor of how to treat the wine and what to, you know, do with it that turned out well in the past. And then, you know, in 2022 and 2023, it was really trying to figure out, okay, well, that worked, but now what are we going to do to make it better? And, you know, Isabelle Mounier is a mentor of mine, and, you know, how she treats her Pinot and Chardonnay specifically has always been, you know, a driving force now in the coming vintages, and moving from that point to keep learning.
So how would you describe your approach? And if you had to describe your philosophy, describe your approach to winemaking, how would you say it?
Yeah, so I mean, we still like to lean on native ferments, gentle handling, not a lot of additives, or if any, and just trying to really get a sense of place from the vineyard to bottle without doing much to distract from it. So, you know, oak choices, making sure it's only elevating the wine and not covering part of it, and you know, learning where to be gentle but where to push the envelope a little bit more of like extraction and post maceration kind of things. That's kind of where we're tuning into now, of like, oh well, yeah, you could do pump overs, punch downs this many times a day for this long and you would get this, but what are we going to do at the end? Like, are we going to try and extract some more, get a little bit more body, get a little bit more richness from that wine, and just dial that in more. So, hot ferments versus cool ferments, that's like a big, I would say, dividing point for a lot of winemakers out here. Like, a lot of people are cool, slow ferment, preserves, you know, the fruitiness and all of that. Okay. Then there's the other group that's like, okay, well, if you keep it warm, then you get this whole other character to it. And then
with the first, thinking specifically of the first year, what was there anything about being a winemaker that you were not expecting or not prepared for?
It's a good question. I would say I was not expecting to be at my desk as much as I am. And, you know, I've seen other winemakers be at their desk, and I was like, well, I don't know. But that didn't really resonate for some reason, and realized, you know, there is a lot of, you know, administrative time that you have to spend on the winemaking side of things. And yeah. And then also, being in front of people was the other aspect I wasn't really considering from the beginning. It's generally my uncomfortable place is, being in front of people and talking to them. So getting used to that is probably the challenging aspect to my job.
How's it going?
It's going. It gets better, but yeah, still not comfortable ever.
How do you, when you're talking about your wines or your process, is it getting easier as you've done it a few years?
Yes, I would say so. Still learning how to judge, when people want all the information or not, because for me, a lot of times I go really in depth into something, explaining a wine and how it was made, and then the person will just kind of get glazed eyes and be like, all right, well, maybe I went a little too in depth here and you just really wanted to know like tasting notes or something. So just balancing, being inspired to talk about it and what they're really looking for.
You talked about some of the different varietals here that are kind of unexpected in the valley. I'm curious about learning to work with those, learning to work with things like Aligote or obviously you'd worked with Sauv Blanc before, but tell me about working with things that aren't Pinot and Chardonnay and what the process has been like for you.
I mean, it's been really fun. That's the fun part, I guess, is figuring out, well, if we did it this way last year and it did this, maybe it was too round, like, well, let's try it this way this year. And then it's just about experimenting and figuring out what really makes the fruit sing. And that's just been the liberty that they give to allow me to do that has been really nice.
And what about on the sort of the customer perspective on unexpected varietals in the valley? What has been the reaction to people when they see what you're growing here and what you're making here?
I think that's what actually draws people to Andante. As I said, our Pinots are beautiful and our Chardonnays are too, but when people see that we have Sauv Blanc and Aligote, Marsanne, that's, I think, what brings them out. And because it's not like anyone else, really. That's the consumer has been very receptive to all the other varietals.
Let's talk about your own side project with Laurent. Tell me about how that came to be.
Yeah, so, in 16 when we were dreaming and scheming, as you would say, really realizing that we wanted the same things in life, that, we wanted eventually to have our own wine brand. We wanted to eventually have our own vineyard. We don't have a vineyard, but we have made the step and created our own brand, and just realizing that we love the same varietals, we have a lot of the same thought processes in terms of how to treat the grapes, and he comes in for harvest as well and is like the other winemaker during that time, and so we, even with Andante, so we work very closely, and luckily we have the same thought process for how to treat the fruit and create wine, and it's just been a slow process to launch our own brand, even though we thought about it back in 2016, but we're really excited.
Well, let's talk about the process then. Obviously, there's a lot of steps along the way between the dreaming and the actual wine. So tell me about, let's talk about name and label first. Tell me about what the name is and why.
Yeah, Les Chevaux Ivres, which literally translates to like the drunken horses, and it's kind of a nod to our last name as Percherons, which are a type of horse, and then it's fun and playful. Like, we're making wine, so like, why not be drunk? But also, trying to be be playful about like the dreaming and the scheming as well. Like drunk on not just wine, but ideas and life and the whole project itself. So, yeah, and then we haven't launched it yet. We're going to be launching our new logo, which is a California poppy in like a fleur-de-lis shape to really try and bring back to resonate with our backgrounds too. California, he's from France, and how we combined together to create our project. So
it's really cool. I like that.
Thank you.
Tell me about the first wine, choosing the first wine to make the first grapes to buy for your project.
Yeah, so we partnered with a vineyard, Windhorse Vineyards, out in the Columbia Gorge AVA, and we were at the time searching for things like Cab Franc and Chenin Blanc, and but there was none to be found, and so we stumbled along Windhorse, which I did a lot of research on them and love their philosophy and their ethics, and their kind of like more accountability to sustainable practices, both like environmental and towards workers. And that just resonated with us as well. And, anyone that we have decided that we want to partner with, like, they need to have the same core values in terms of vineyard practices and ethics kind of thing. So, and yeah, they had Syrah available, and we love Syrah. So we decided to get, it was 1.2 tons the very first year. So it's very small. But with full-time jobs as well, and then having to sell your product after the fact, it's been fun. But
and another horse right there in the vineyard. I mean,
exactly.
It's kind of perfect.
Serendipitous.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, that wasn't. I mean, it wasn't intentional in the sense that I wasn't looking for horse names for vineyards, but it just happened, and then it was just one more point. I was like, well, this must be it. This must be the first fruit we have, because horse, ethics.
Was it different making wine for a brand with your own name on it?
Yes and no. I mean, we have been funding our own project with our own money, and in that idea, you're like, well, it's in there. We're not getting it back in any way. So like, that's just there now. I think it's almost less pressure, because with working under, another winery, it's like, that's not your money. That's not your product in that way. And so if something goes wrong, it's a little bit different feeling than if it goes wrong with your own. So it's a little bit more freeing in that way.
And you mentioned selling it, obviously no one's favorite job when it comes to wine, or few people's favorite job when it comes to wine. So tell me about the thought process behind getting your wine out into the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a complicated one since we don't have a tasting room. And just right now we're all wholesale, except for the friends and family that do buy direct from us. But yeah, just trying to build that kind of knowledge base that we're here, and you'll see us, in local stores and restaurants, and maybe that will inspire people to come to our website, and eventually, hopefully, we figure out some sort of way to do tastings and really can get people to try our wine in a lower pressure setting than like committing to a whole bottle or whatever at a restaurant or at a wine shop. So yeah, that's the challenging part of I would say having our own wine now. Is easy to make it. You got to sell it after the fact, and that's the hard one.
So where does that project go next? What else do you want to make?
So this year we're making Cab Franc and Riesling and a Grenache. Again, all from the Columbia Gorge and Hood River area. And so that'll be fun. We'll have Syrah from last year as well. And then we just kind of, doubled our production level. So it'll be nice to bring on some different products and wines for people to try, and we're excited. So.
You talked about the kind of the core values for people, for your brand and for people you want to work with. Tell me about the process. Is it different than Andante? Are you making wine differently, or are you approaching it differently?
I would say that it's more, I guess, a cooperative between Laurent and myself with our own project. You know, we sit down and we discuss and we taste and we figure out how could we change this? How could we enhance it before it's finished? And what should we do for cap management kind of thing? And what barrel coopers. And for Andante, you know, it's a little bit different just because he is the vineyard manager and he is a winemaker, but I'm the head winemaker, and so it's just kind of more like I get the final say in that way. And you know, it just is different.
You obviously mentioned growing already and doing some different varietals. What is the sort of the long-term vision then for your brand?
I think ultimately, like, our long-term goal is to, you know, have our own vineyard and winery and within the Willamette Valley area, but really, you know, have Chenin, Cab Franc, maybe a few others, but focus on the non-traditional Oregon varietals.
Let's talk a bit about the Oregon wine industry then a little bit. You talked a little bit about kind of your initial impressions of it, but I'm curious. You came into the industry at a kind of a boom time, I feel like, for Oregon wine. What did you think of the industry at large, and what have been some of the changes you've seen in the last few years?
To be fair, I mean, I came in and I was in the southern Willamette Valley. So it's not the same feel as the northern Willamette part. It's not like wineries everywhere. In that area, it's actually, I feel like, bigger microbrewery industry. So, you know, comparing that experience to 19 when we came up here, it just, you know, you're saturated more or less with everyone up here, and it's not less laid back, but it's just, you know, busier, and everyone's making great wine, and it's maybe harder to stand out in that way because you have so many people all making great wine.
Back up for a moment and talk about everyone's favorite topic, which is 2020. And I'm curious about your experiences, both pandemic related, but specifically 2020 harvest related. What was the experience like for you that year? What were some of the decisions you had to make, and I guess how did things go?
Yeah, 2020 was not a great year for anyone in the valley. We did end up making Pinot that year, red Pinot and a white Pinot, and you know, it was kind of scary seeing the sky red, but we picked early, and we did end up making wine, and we just tell people, you know, it's tasting beautiful now. I wouldn't age it because, you know, it might end up having smoke issues later, but it's beautiful now, so please enjoy. And you know, tough decisions. Luckily, 2020 wasn't the year that I had to make any tough decisions, because that would have been a very hard year. So yeah, it was definitely, from the outside perspective, I could see stressful, and you know, it's a lot of choices to make there. Do you keep it? Do you not harvest it? Do you harvest it and dump it after? Or yeah, so it's just a lot of hard choices there.
Assuming you were to face something like that in the future, what were your biggest takeaways from that year?
don't rely on ETS to get you scores when you need them, because it's just a super long waiting period, and if you're trying to decide whether or not you want to pick it and make it into something, that process, it takes money, it takes labor and time, and it's more about, hang time and how long it was in the air, and what the particles, ppm were in the air and everything. And so trying to make decisions based on that rather than off of waiting for ETS to get you a number.
So you talked about how you've seen Oregon kind of evolve busier and making good wine. What is next for Oregon? What is the industry heading from here?
That I don't know. I can say that I'm excited to see all of these smaller producers, as I mentioned, popping up with the unique varietals, and I think that in that way change is afoot. And that's really pleasant to see, because it gives people variety and shows that Oregon can be known for other things as well. I think that it will always be known for producing world-class Pinot and Chardonnay, but a little bit more substance in the other areas as well.
Is there anything on the horizon that concerns you?
I would say that from like my own personal brand perspective, saturation is always the concern. Yeah, I just spoke about it's great seeing these little producers pop up everywhere. We're one of them. How do you stand out? That's concerning, especially when you can't compete with people who have the tasting room and the vineyard and the winery and all that kind of thing. And then, the push for anti-alcohol, like no level is safe, has been just a hard point to kind of balance for the wine industry, and so that's a little bit, concerning. But alcohol is always going to be something people want. Prohibition is an example of that, and then just figuring out the distribution as well. I think that, again, that's just a saturated market, and that's got to balance somehow.
You brought up, obviously, background in environmental science, and you brought up sort of the climate changing earlier. What have been your sort of perspectives on that, or your what have you noticed on that, and what do you see for your own future as you look ahead, how that will affect what you're trying to do?
Yeah. It's definitely a concern for everyone that, has an established vineyard that wants long-term longevity out of their vineyard, and figuring out if it gets warmer, are we in a situation where, like, the vineyard is either irrigated or has deep enough roots to reach the water table, kind of thing. And, for us personally, Laurent and myself, like, if we have a vineyard, we don't want to have to irrigate it. That's a limited commodity as well. Water is very important. And so just finding a place that can support a vineyard long term in the future as the climate changes.
So obviously you have a lot of things going right now. Tell me about what's next. What's on the horizon that you're excited about for yourself, personally or professionally, and what have you not done yet that you want to do?
Well, personally and professionally, growing our small brand, continuing to make our name, put our stamp on it, as you would. And then back to Andante, you know, being able to work with the newer varietals that aren't yet producing the Cab Franc and Chenin, and just really dialing in, you know, what we can do well here.
All right. That's all the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything that we didn't cover today that you'd like to cover? Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, sharing this beautiful space with us, and taking the time to be part of our project. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll let you off the hook.
Okay.
Thank you.